Good morning, good evening, wherever you gentle listeners may be. This is Commander Culture. I am your perspicacious purveyor of samizdat, and joining me again today is the Templar. We had such a great time last time, we decided to do it all over again. This time, we're going to be a little bit more over his target. In addition to being a tactician, he is also trained in the economic arts. So we're going to benefit from his wisdom today. So let's go ahead and get started here.
Yeah,
What?
I
Mhm.
appreciate you having me on again. Always a great opportunity to be here, and appreciate the introduction. We'll see if I live up to the name.
Well, we definitely enjoy having you on here, and you've lived up to the name tactician and the name Templar so far. So the name economist is surely cannot be far behind. So today, what we're talking about, the title here is "Wealth Destroyed, Wealth Preserved." It's kind of I like catchy titles, but really, this is a very serious topic, especially in the environment that we find ourselves in today, where people's livelihoods are being threatened, where their ability to generate wealth, both immediately and intergenerationally, is being eroded, and where the wealth that they do have, either accumulated in their own lifetime or passed down to them, is being sort of taken from them in different forms, taxation, inflation, things like that, as the political climate gets a little bit more confiscatory, if that's an actual word. And so we're going to be talking about that today, and how wealth is first destroyed, or damaged, or interdicted, and what you can do to sort of preserve it, and why that's even important. Wealth kind of has a dirty name, doesn't it? Where somebody thinks, "Oh, wealth," and they get this image of Scrooge McDuck diving through his jewels and gold coins, and you think, "Oh, what a rotten bum." Think of all the ducks that are sitting there in China, waiting to be turned into Christmas dinner for Ralphie, and here he's diving around in gold. But that's not really what wealth is, and we're going to talk about wealth in general, and money in particular, what that is as well. And if some of this may be old hat to the listeners, and if it is, jump on into the chat and talk to us about it. If you're learning something new, the same thing. That's what we hope to do, is to bring meaningful discussion to you. So here we go. We talk about wealth. Any thoughts there, Mr. Templar?
Yeah, so when you talk about wealth, you will inevitably bring up the concept of money. And when I first heard that we would be discussing this topic, it's it's difficult oftentimes to discuss anything in the economics realm because it's kind of all downstream from broader picture things. So it's hard to even talk about money when people disagree on what money even is. Some people say your Federal Reserve note, that's just a piece of paper. Only gold is a valid form of currency, or if it's not backed by some commodity, or no, all of that is trash. You have to go with cryptocurrencies now because it's the only thing that can't be manipulated. And
Mhm.
if you can't even agree on what you would use to represent wealth, it's hard to even have a discussion about this topic. So I'm going to try to condense real quick. I'm going to provide us some context for this topic, and we'll go real big picture, and we'll get narrow real quick. So I'll come at you lightning fast. This is years of exposure to this topic condensed into, we'll keep it under 10 minutes.
Sure.
All right, so here we go. A lot of this is inspired by Thomas Sowell, not the Australian white supremacist. I'm talking about Thomas Sowell, the black economist guy. Um,
I
and
didn't know there were
he's
two of them.
Yeah, there were, and I thought it was hilarious when I found out they were shared the same name because they're
Interesting.
slate opposites. But
Yeah.
no, real high IQ dude. He grew up a communist. Actually, went through the whole Harvard pipeline, and then it was only after he got to a position in government that he realized that nobody in the government actually cares about you, which pretty much led him to abandon his whole altruistic, the government's here to help idea. But that's besides the point. He's written a lot of great books. One of the most monumental ones is Basic Economics. It's over 1,000 pages. You could either read the whole thing or you could just read the section that pertains to you the most. But if you want to know more about economics than 99.9% of the population or even politicians, if you even crack that book open once, it'll pretty much get you there. So a lot of this is inspired by that book, but again, also exposure to some other academic sources in and out of classrooms. So we'll get into again the context of money itself. So we'll start with economics, and we'll get real specific real quick. Economics, it's the allocation of scarce resources which have alternative uses. That's the definition. And so economic debates are usually disagreements on how to go about allocating those resources. Every economic discussion boils down to that one problem. And each group, society, civilization has to ask themselves how they're going to resolve that problem. How do you allocate scarce resources which have alternative uses? And we've seen different ways that different countries have tried to answer this question throughout history. Some have been better at it, and some have been worse at it. On one hand, you have the free market solution, which relies on individuals using an agreed upon medium of exchange to voluntarily participate in mutually beneficial transactions. I'll elaborate on that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have what's called a command economy, which relies on a central decision-making entity that's responsible for allocating those resources. There's basically no economy that exists on either end of the spectrum today, but if I were to give an example of each, I would say probably the most free market was a pre-1860s United States, and then the most deliberate command economy would be the USSR, naturally. In the middle, you have a country maybe like China or Nazi Germany, which was basically free markets, but the government reserved the right to intervene in any way at any time and would do so often. So again, these are types of economies, and these are ways that countries have attempted to answer the question of how to go about allocating scarce resources. The kind of economy we will discuss the most, and the one that's the most relevant to us, is the free market one. That's the most relevant solution, and again, that relies upon individuals using money to engage in trade. And I'll just very quickly explain why the authoritarian solution, the command economy, does not and cannot work. And so remember, a command economy is an economy which relies on central decision-making entities to allocate resources. So they don't work for a lot of reasons. One of the dumbest reasons is the subjective theory of value versus the labor theory of value. We won't get into that. Marx said it was the labor theory of value that they would use to allocate resources, but value is subjective. I value a hamburger different than somebody else would value a hamburger. That's pretty obvious. So that was just one of the big debates there. But really, the main reason why command economies do not work is because of the calculation problem of central economic planning. That's just a fancy way of saying that government officials cannot efficiently allocate scarce resources. It's a very bad, very inefficient way of running an economy. Anyone who has been part of the military or any government organization for that matter can attest to the disgusting amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that occurs. The point is that individuals motivated by what's in their best interest can more effectively allocate their resources than some central authority ever could. I guess one example of the government allocation method would be, a figure of authority is given a set dollar amount, and then they have to disseminate those dollars to their subordinates. And often the only thing that they have to go off of is how much money those subordinates have spent in the past. And then these subordinates have an incentive to essentially spend as much money as they possibly can in order to justify that dollar amount in the future. It's often a use it or lose it sort of mentality in any government organization. And so you have this positive feedback loop of just constant fraud, waste, and abuse that incentivizes fraud, waste, and abuse. But that's
and you're saying that that's a feature of a command economy?
Yes, a top-down way of allocating resources. And this is,
because that's very common even in the United States, in the way that bureaucratic budgets, in the cabinet positions, the executive branches. That's the way they're run. Is they're run up to that top dollar amount, and then if you don't spend that top dollar amount, your next year's budget is reduced by whatever amount you didn't spend, and so of course there are cost overruns, and so it leads to an upward spiral of spending
Yep.
on fewer and fewer productive enterprises.
Yep. Yep. And that's a feature, not a bug. When this is for the sake of people, if you want to expand that authority to the private sector as well, you nationalize a company or something like that, it's going to fall victim to the exact same concept. You're going to have somebody at the top, and this is again the definition of a command economy, somebody or a group of people who are allocating these resources from a top-down way. Okay, so that's a very bad way of doing it. This brings us back to the free market solution. And what we defined the free market solution for resource allocation is individuals using an agreed upon medium of exchange to voluntarily participate in mutually beneficial transactions. And the most important part about that definition is that medium of exchange. That is money. That is the key to the efficient allocation of scarce resources. So prices are a reflection of supply and demand. They represent the value of a good or a service to society. This is known as a market signal, and those market signals in the form of prices combined with people acting in their own best interest creates this hyper-efficient economic phenomenon simply called the invisible hand. And that was a term coined by Adam Smith, and I know you've mentioned that in the past. But that is the free market solution for the economic problem of resource allocation. And it has the economic effect, essentially, of water seeking its own level, where resources will flow to the places where they're needed most. The point of all of this, yeah, go ahead.
That brings up an interesting sort of confluence, if you'll forgive the science pun, with rivers there. So it sounds like what you're saying in regards to the way that an economy works is that it is in essence a natural system. An economy is not a machine. An economy is an organic expression of the organisms that inhabit it. Would you agree?
I mean, I agree. It's worse than that though. It's almost like if you define, I guess, a dog, it's a natural, it's an animal, but you can have a human create something that resembles a dog and it be essentially inferior to what a dog actually is. And it's a rough analogy for, both of them you could theoretically label as dogs. It's the same way.
I love that. I love that. You know why? Because again, I'm probably going to bring it up every stream ever, but it all comes back to Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park, right? Where the dinosaurs that they created in Jurassic Park were not actually dinosaurs. They were animals that looked like dinosaurs. And the more that they attempted to control that system that they had created, the more out of whack the system actually became.
Yeah.
It's almost a metaphor for a command economy, where the tighter that you grip onto the reins of the complexity of that environment, the more problems you're going to have in that environment, trying to work with animals or natural phenomena that you can't actually control. I love it. That's an economy right there. You could even you could teach an entire economics class just out of Jurassic Park. But I'm going to let you continue.
No, I mean that was pretty much the point that I was going to make. There was basically make the point of the critical role that money plays in a society, and that when politicians mess with money, they're usually playing with a tool that few of them understand and none of them can control. And it's just like a child playing with a loaded shotgun. People are going to get hurt or die, and they do. And so I would just like to, with that context, we understand at this point the role that money plays and how important it is to a functioning economy. I would like to provide a definition at this point in the form of characteristics. And just like anything else, like a gun, money is it's a tool, and it makes trade easier. And so it's not inherently evil in and of itself. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
useful tool.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have better or worse tools, or higher quality or lower quality tools.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were to describe money, the characteristics include it has to be a consistent medium of exchange. So if you use goods to barter, you can't use, like a cow and a car, as none of those are money in and of themselves, because you need a consistent form. So like a bullet, if you have the same caliber bullet, at least that's a consistent medium of exchange. So that's closer to money than some other good would be.
Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't be perfect because the bullet might be using weaker metals, or it might be using less gunpowder, even if it's the same, caliber, right? So
Yeah, well, and
there's an
the other
escalating scale of quality of money. Sure. Mhm.
yeah, yeah, and the other problem with that is you can't, cut
A
half a
bullet,
car.
right?
You can't use half a bullet.
Hmm.
So you kind of have to, when you have a good, it has to be a reasonable medium of
It has to be
exchange.
divisible, right? That's a
Essentially,
yeah.
yeah, it just needs to be conducive for trade.
Hmm.
And that's kind of brings us to the next point of a characteristic of money, is that it needs to be portable. And this is one of the downsides of a commodity, as a form of money, because you're not able to carry around $100,000 worth of gold in your pocket. But a single check, you could do that, and you could do it safely.
Right.
And this is where you start getting into the kind of the modern federal banknote. And this goes back as far as, in European times, medieval times, instead of carrying giant chests of gold from point A to point B, there would be a bank in Venice and a bank in Amsterdam. And the traveler would just take the receipt, the banknote from the bank in Venice, and bring it to the bank in Amsterdam. And that would be good as gold, as they say. It would be a notarized means of pulling gold out of that other bank, and then that note is essentially a receipt for a set amount of money,
Hmm.
for a set amount of gold. But again, we'll get to that. It's a commodity backed currency, but the point is that it needs to be portable. Commodities like the gold and silver you see there aren't necessarily always a feasibly portable option. And
Hmm.
the last
Especially not
characteristic,
safely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because if you drop
And
a check or a letter of, or a letter of payment off of the edge of a ship or something, or it gets lost in a shipwreck, you can just recreate it. Whereas if you lose your shipment of gold to the briny deep, you're out of luck, right?
or yeah, absolutely, or
Hmm.
some pirates.
Pirates, sure,
100%. Yeah,
never
because
forget them.
you could also list who the recipient on that check is. So,
Hmm.
and then the last characteristic of money, and this is the most hotly debated one, is it needs to be a store of value. And so everyone, says gold is the ultimate form of money, and it's like, yes, because it has a great historic track record of having inherent value. But you look at other commodities like aluminum. I believe there was a brick of aluminum placed in the Capitol building because when it was built, the technology was just emerging for us to heat aluminum to the temperature that it needed to be in order to be formed into an ingot. And that made it a very, very expensive metal. Nowadays, we have the technology to create tons of aluminum, and you can just buy it off the shelf in your grocery store, and it's extremely cheap metal. And so, even if it's a commodity, that might not be your bid for success when it comes to having a consistent store of value over time. So I'm not
So
saying gold is going to become irrelevant or anything. It's just, the point is that these things are fluctuating relative to each other as well. So it's not like a commodity is the end all be all.
it seems to me that yeah, as you're talking about it, money as we think about it is we think of it as something hard or something tangible, $100 bill, a gold bar, a Bitcoin on a ledger, but it's almost psychological, isn't it? I mean, money is only worth something, even with all those definitions, if we impute it with value. right? I'm sure you've heard of the Southeast Asian culture that had giant round rocks
Stones.
or
Yeah.
circular stones that they valued, and others like in Africa they used cowrie shells that were very rare in Africa, but you know. And nowadays, anybody could create one of those stones, or anybody could just, order on Amazon a whole bunch of cowrie shells or something. And it's even the same with something like gold or something like Bitcoin, where we give it value because it is currently to us, like you said with the aluminum ingot, rare.
Yeah. And
I'm
have inherent value, like you
well,
can use it for things
right. It has inherent value
today.
because, yeah, exactly, because we can utilize it. But if we go out to space and we find an asteroid, we're going to find them laced with gold everywhere. And gold will become worth a lot less. If I remember there was an old Twilight Zone episode where some thief had frozen himself and gone forward in time, and he was clutching this bar of gold and murdered all of his compatriots for it. And at the end, he's dying, and he wants to exchange this giant bar of gold for one glass of water, and then he dies. And the guy looks at it, and the rescuer's like, "Oh, this is sad. Look, this guy was clutching this gold. How worthless this is. We found tons of it out in outer space." And so all of that can change, and something else that's so it seems that the key component to what makes proper money is rarity in our own mind,
Yeah,
almost more than anything else.
yes, as a tool, it has to serve as a facilitator for trade. Is what it does. It speeds up the process of trade. It makes trade more efficient, more easy.
More
And
efficient than
so
barter.
yes,
Yes.
essentially, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's right. It's difficult to bring your cattle from point A to point B. It's difficult to sell someone half a car. Yes, money makes trade more easy and more efficient. And the more exchanges you have between individuals, it's mutually beneficial. And so both parties are left better off when you engage
Mhm.
in trade. And then you start getting into specialization and the hyper efficiency that comes with that. And that's why you don't see one guy who tries to raise a pig, grow his own wheat, grow his own lettuce, grow his own tomatoes just to make a sandwich or something like that.
Mhm.
Instead, you
Mhm.
have a hog farmer, a wheat farmer, a X, Y, and Z, and then they trade for these things with each other, and more people have more things as a
I
result.
I think you made a really, really good point, that I want to highlight because you just went right over the top of it. But that is that trade and economic activity in general, um, always benefits both parties if it's done right. If
Mhm.
somebody's getting screwed, then it's not proper economic activity. That's a point I'm going to get to a little bit later in this discussion. But a true economic activity, both parties benefit mutually, or they both take something away that they wanted from the exchange. um, in anything else, any other circumstance or situation, what you're essentially dealing with is a form of theft. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, well, when you intervene, when you create, see, this is goes back to your point about it being the natural state of things. When two people engage in trade, they would be doing that no matter what. And then when you have a third party intervene, it's no longer the sort of natural
Mm,
state that it would be without that third party intervention. And
I get
so,
it.
when you talk about theft, about a intervention in mutually beneficial transactions that are voluntary, it's not always in the form of a tax. It could be something like a minimum wage or something like that. And this is an argument for or against the minimum wage. The point is that you have a system that would occur naturally, and then a politician, for whatever reason, maybe they care about a worker, or they say they do, maybe they just want to get reelected, but they do something like impose a $15 minimum wage. This is an artificial intervention in what would otherwise be a natural system of supply and demand. In this case, not of a commodity or a good, but of the labor, the service that a laborer would provide. And
Hmm.
so, if you say a janitor needs to be paid $15 an hour, or a doctor needs to be paid $15 an hour, you're most likely altering what the natural intersection of those supply and demand curves would warrant, which
Hmm.
creates an inefficiency. And this is in a vacuum, essentially, in
Hmm.
a bubble of a free market. And it's also hard to talk about this because I'm like, preaching the beauty of a free market, the hyper efficiency of a free market. And in reality, I wouldn't say that that's always the go-to means of resource allocation in every instance, every time. There's a lot of other factors that come into play.
Right.
So yeah, there are a lot of reasons other than efficiency why you would do something like a $15 minimum wage or something like that.
Well, I think
Go
that's
ahead.
another good point there. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to highlight it where you mentioned the whole third party thing, where and the image that came into my mind was like a seesaw, right? And whether it's a naturalistic system with two organisms, or whether it's a trade with two people, or whether it's a seesaw with two kids on either side, in any one of those circumstances at all, it's a naturalistic system based on the laws of physics
Yep.
and
Got
thermodynamics.
gravity
And
or water
right,
sitting
like
at the level.
water, exactly. But you add a third element or a third individual or a third organism on in any of that, and it's going to throw the whole thing off. You can't have three people on a seesaw. You can't have a high point and a low point and have anything in
It wouldn't
between
be the
that
same
that's
as that
going to break.
it would be if it wasn't there. Is the point.
Right, right. It disrupts the naturalistic system, and it adds a layer of complexity that will later on add greater disruptions to a system that would otherwise work better without the disruptions than it does
Yeah, there's
with
a lot of
disruptions.
unintended consequences, and it's practically impossible for any one person to know what all the secondary, tertiary order of effects will be in a system as complex as an economy, doing an adjustment as simple as a minimum wage adjustment. Like
Hmm.
it's hard to advocate for adjusting a minimum wage rate just because you simply don't know all the ramifications. And how can it's like, if I decide to change the number of janitors there are in the country, or change the number of doctors, which is functionally what you'd be doing by adjusting the wage rate because people make decisions off of pay.
Hmm.
What kind of effects is that going to have? It's incalculable, the different uh effects and ripples that would have across the economy. And we're talking about something very simple. And when you start getting to like adjusting interest rates and Federal Reserve rates and printing dollars and everything, now you're talking about really, really orders of magnitude greater effects and greater ripples and greater complexity. It gets pretty messy pretty quick.
Okay, excellent.
Real quick question for you, actually. Have
Yeah.
you heard of the concept of price gouging?
Um, I mean, I guess in the general sense, like if you're in a war and there's a shortage, and somebody says, "Oh, I've got plenty of rice or plenty of baby food," I'm going to charge you an exorbitant amount beyond what the market rate would have been when there wasn't a war. Is
Yes,
that what you mean?
that.
Yeah.
Yes. And then, not to put you on the spot, but I'm curious about what you think about that.
um, I think that. I think that it's wrong from a moral perspective. I think that the what the individuals who make up a culture, and then larger a society, or smaller a society, have a responsibility to their fellow members in that small canoe on the large lake called their culture or their society, and to sort of selfishly hoard all the water in the lifeboat, so to speak. I guess that's a good metaphor.
Hmm.
Is irresponsible because going back to kind of what you were saying, it would misallocate the the resources. All of the value would go to the guy who had the water or the baby food in the shortage, and less value would go to the people who would have otherwise had it were the system not working.
Hmm.
I think going back into historical circumstances, monasteries and things like that, people gave out of their poverty, and the monasteries didn't really hoard the wealth. They distributed it among the village and the community, to and infrastructure projects and things like that. So even though it was tough times, so I don't think that there's a good case for rampant price gouging in general. Although I think that people who are comically and irresponsibly unprepared for eventualities that are foreseeable would probably have to pay a higher price for that in worse in bad circumstances.
Yeah. I would say to that, I think that perfectly highlights that question, the price gouging question, kind of perfectly highlights, the disparity between the free market answer versus all of the other factors that you have to factor in when you're not talking about a perfectly free market, little bubble, cold calculated environment. And so to your point, yes, all of those things apply 100%. I would just like to include the free market perspective to you and to the listeners, because I see a lot of criticism, and oftentimes justified. It could be motivated by greed and basically someone taking advantage of other people's misfortune, which you shouldn't do. But I would point out two things from the free market side before everyone hops on the politician's bandwagon. And again, the politician doesn't care about price gouging either. They're just like giving the people what they want. But from the economics perspective, the price gouging thing does two things. One, it prevents one person from buying everything. So when the price is high, you literally might not be able to afford the whatever commodity that you're trying to buy. And the second thing that it does is it sends a market signal to the rest of the world, really, that there is a high demand for that item in that area. And you can almost bet that there would be truck drivers who were just going to see the price of bottles of water or gasoline in a coastal city that was just hit by a hurricane and say, oh boy, like I just hit the lottery, and turn their truck around that was going to somewhere that was perfectly fine and head straight to that disaster zone. And you actually see that, and then you see that get diverted by politicians keeping artificially low prices, which all it does really is create black markets
and distort the actual market. That's a very good point. I'm not. I don't think I said anywhere that.
Real quick of that, which was a pretty funny one. You think of the most dire situation. There was a shooting in, I think it was some European city, Belgium somewhere. But there was a shooting in one of the cities, and what happened was so many people were ordering Ubers at that very split second that the rate for an Uber driver jumped to like $100 flat rate, like $100, per minute or whatever it was. And Uber got roasted for that. But what was happening was there were Uber drivers who were pulling U-turns, kicking their current patrons like out the door, beating the police to the scene of the shooting and picking people up and getting them out of there. And it was like, I almost, it's hard to believe that that's a bad thing. And that's the most dire situation that you could possibly imagine. And you know what else it is? It was voluntary and it was mutually beneficial. The Uber driver got the paycheck of his life, and that person who was downtown in a shootout got the heck out of there. So it's just the free market thing that a lot of people don't think about when they see, think about the children kind of thing.
Right. No, yeah, I completely agree with you. I think my point was more looking at it from an individual moral perspective rather than a governmental perspective, because I can certainly agree with you that the more that a government tries to fix something, the more it gets broken. That's the old saw from Ronald Reagan, and it's absolutely right. And I think, I watched some videos of people buying toilet paper back in 2020 when they thought the Rona was going to get everyone. And it's like you see people just loading up the back of a pickup truck with toilet paper. And it's like, oh, okay. I don't feel any ill will. It's like, well, they got there first. They're doing the right thing. Should have had toilet paper if you want more toilet paper. But then, you come to circumstances where somebody's like, certain medicines that may or may not have a curative effect, depending on which YouTube censor you ask, of Corona, which would normally cost, 20 cents a dose or something like that. And on the internet, people are selling it for like $500 a dose, right? Even though it only costs like 10 cents to make. And it's like, well, okay, so then it moves over to your circumstance where you say, I don't like this, but I'm going to let the free market solve it. If I instead clamped down on the people selling at $500, well, then that would distort the market, because right now, unbeknownst to me, the government interferer, there's truck drivers driving loads of this medicine or ships or planes or whatever to reduce the price, So, yeah, there you go. And by the way, if the viewers want to jump in on this particular thing and talk about price gouging, or if they've seen it or anything like that, or opinions on it, that would be great as well. But I'll let you continue there, Mr. Templar.
No, that was pretty much it, and that wasn't really a argument for or against. It was mostly just pointing out some circumstances that people usually don't consider when it comes to these kinds of disasters. But that I pretty much said my piece that I need to, with broader the role that money plays in the economy, and then the utility of it, and finally its relevance and importance, and the fact that it's really the crux of manipulation. It's like the one ring to rule them all kind of thing. It's the one money supply to rule them all. If you can control that, you're essentially injecting yourself into every single transaction that happens everywhere where that piece of money is being used, whether the participants know it or not. So that's kind of the crux of the whole discussion here. Hitting on the theft, the taxation, the inflation. These things are all things that revolve around money as a means of storing wealth and transferring wealth, and as a medium of exchange for trade. If we want to get into the moral and ethical uses of it and how to be a good steward with it.
I do. I want to go back real quick to something you mentioned at the beginning of the stream. You were defining Karl Marx's labor theory of value, and if it doesn't put you too much on the spot, could you redefine that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the command economy, they were faced with the calculation problem of central economic planning, and all of these bureaucrats were wondering what market signal they were going to use to try to allocate resources. And because they didn't have prices, because they were essentially the ones deciding the allocation of resources and not the prices, they had to, it's almost like a stock market. Like we have a stock market today, which heavily rewards people for predicting the flow of resources, essentially. And if you can predict the utility of something before it's realized, and you can invest in it early on, once it comes to fruition, you theoretically get your return. And there are very, very intelligent people whose sole job it is to try to funnel money into profitable endeavors. And in this command economy, it's almost the opposite, where you have these bureaucrats whose job it is just to, decide where a piece of steel goes. If you have iron ore, raw material, do you decide if that goes into building a bridge? Do you decide if that goes into building a boat? If you're at war, now everything's going to go to building a tank. And so you have all of these different possibilities that iron ore could become. If you're a bureaucrat, how do you decide where it's going to go? And so what they settled on, because they weren't relying on people's subjective value and that being represented in the form of prices, what they had to settle on was the labor theory of value, which was how long does it take to produce this good. And it's really funny. There's a lot of great memes about how stupid that is. But they were literally just doing what they could to try to make a more calculated means of resource allocation. But basically, if a piece of iron ore takes 4 hours to produce, and a piece of gold takes 10 hours to produce, there is that 4 to 10 ratio of value to those pieces of of goods, and then you plug all of these different fake labor theory value numbers into all these different commodities, and you divvy up those resources as such. And so it's a, like I said, an inefficient way of assigning value to things, and it's doesn't simplify the problem of, where does this raw material go? What do we make baseball bats with it? And what you would often see, this would be manifested in the Soviet Union, is you have, you know, thousands and thousands of yards of extra rope sitting in a port in Port Arthur on one side of the country, and then you have thousands and thousands of shoes with no shoelaces sitting in Moscow on the other side of the country. And it was
Mhm.
because some bureaucrat didn't allocate enough of those pieces of rope to become shoelaces, and didn't allocate enough of those shoes to be used by the dock workers in Port Arthur. And it's that times a million across the entire country. And the funniest part about this is that the Russian economy was propped up by a black market. Like, it's hypothesized. I mean, it's a black market, so there's no way of officially tracking it. But it was hypothesized that the black market was larger than the legal running bureaucratic market. And the
Mhm.
final piece that I'll say is all of those bureaucrats, the thousands and thousands of bureaucrats that it took to inefficiently manage this market, could have just disappeared and entered the labor force and been productive, but instead you have a bunch of useful idiots, making the whole system less efficient. And
Mhm.
so it's really just a big circular firing squad, and we saw how that played out. Shortages, corruption, black markets. It's untenable, essentially.
Well, but perversely, that massive black market that developed under the Soviet Union was almost a saving grace, because when the political entity known as the Soviet Union collapsed, there was not widespread starvation, even though in theory there should have been, because from
Yeah.
each according to their ability to each according to their need, everyone was in government jobs. But everything, I mean, people kept going. The society that individuals lived at versus the society the government said it was creating was completely bifurcated, and it was pre-collapsed. So when Gorbachev went away and Yeltsin stood on the tank and waved the flag and all of this great stuff happened, the Russian people and the people under Soviet rule just sort of kept
Yep.
doing their
Just carried
thing
on.
with their little black market, and so in a way I think black market gets a bad name too, because what the black market really is, and maybe you would
a
disagree, but maybe
natural
you would agree,
a natural
yeah,
state
it's
of things.
it's
Yes.
it's just the invisible hand becoming
Yes.
more visible, while humans try and make a more and more desperate attempts to control it.
Yep, it's
uh,
what happens when you drop a big, when you're a kid and you try to dam a little creek and you drop a big rock in the middle of the creek and the water goes around it.
mhm,
There's your
mhm.
black market. Natural flow of things. Yeah.
So to move on a bit, I one of the things you see in the notes that I made, and yes, gentle viewers, I make notes. I can't do this all off the top of my head. Is about wealth, is that I considered it to be, and maybe this is like the libertarian streak in me, or maybe I've been propagandized too much by communist educators. But it's wealth. Your wealth in general is a condensation of your sunk time, your sunk energy, and your sunk knowledge. So all of these aspects that you've put into your lifelong endeavor sort of accrete to you as your wealth. Does that sound completely left field to someone with your training, or?
No, that's perfectly accurate. And a lot of times, perfect example. You got the picture up there of the man wiping the sweat of his brow, and it's kind of funny because a lot of people think this is kind of where the labor theory value came in. Was they see people in brutal conditions sweating all day under the sun, and then they see bankers or the more white collar workers in air conditioned offices, just taking craps on golden toilets and everything. And they're like, well, clearly this guy in the field is working significantly harder. Why is it right that he would get paid so much less than someone who lives or works in such a comfortable environment? And look at the tool that man is using.
Hmm.
Whoever created that tool theoretically created more product than that man pushing the tool. The
Hmm.
same way a guy pulling a lever in an assembly line did not necessarily create as much value as he otherwise would have if that machine that he was using to amplify his productivity had not been created. And so a lot of times that gets lost is the someone streamlines a process, makes it more efficient, is just a people person and manages personnel well, or does the research and development thing and makes a single worker significantly more productive, and then they essentially collect some of that surplus productivity and put it in their pockets, and it's useful because it rewards people who make people more productive. And so you look at someone like Bill Gates. Is like, does Bill Gates really deserve all the money that he has? And if you think about the added level of productivity that PCs have contributed to the planet, you really have to say, yeah, that looks like trillions of dollars of productivity to me. But you would never realize that, just sitting there at your computer at your job, why am I giving, why is Bill Gates getting some of this money every time I use Microsoft Word and I renew my subscription? It's like,
Right.
does he really deserve to be a trillionaire? It's hard to comprehend that, but it's a lot of times yes, and a lot of the times it is also no, because you see people who focus on winning, government contracts or something, and there's a lot of organizations that basically run on the best example of this is COVID money. Pfizer and
Hmm.
Moderna, their stocks have gone up thousands of percents each, and that's not because they're selling a product that was naturally in demand. That's because they're selling a product to the government, and the government has infinity dollars and will pick and choose the winners and losers of an economy because they also artificially created an environment that put every single small business out of work, which took all of those small business, all of those transactions that were occurring at that level. Now people just, and now people are stuck at home too. So they just take all that money that would have gone to those individuals and they pay for things on Amazon to be shipped to their door because the small business is closed and they can't leave their house. So now Amazon, added another $1 trillion to their profit margins, and that was a completely artificial generation. So you see both sides of it. Someone who makes exorbitant amounts of money when you think they shouldn't, but you just can't see the actual utility that they're contributing to a free market. And then on the flip side, you have the government intervention just making millionaires out of people who aren't even worthy of being shoe shiners.
Hmm.
And there's your
Hmm.
there's your artificial contributions.
Hmm. Okay. Very interesting there. I think, wow, if sort of the process that you described of, let me go back to the
Was
other
that me
picture.
answering the labor theory of value?
That was, yes, you answered it
Oh,
just like an
okay.
economist.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
In a very
exactly.
verbose way. It's okay. We didn't lose any viewers because I put the picture of the female farmer up there.
Exactly.
But so we've got this chap here with his old instrument of farming, and you said basically, whoever comes up with more efficient numbers of these allows farming to continue more efficiently. And I would say nowadays we're at a point where we're so efficient that you can have one farmer farm hundreds, even thousands of acres almost by himself, or maybe him and his wife or him and his son with huge machines,
Yep.
and then moving
And a
that
lot of
out to
people
the
think
to
that's
the
a bad
rest.
thing. A lot of people think that's a bad thing. They say like, oh, the number of farmers in America has gone down to like 1%
Mhm.
now, feeding the entire country. And it's like, I mean, yeah, if you value an agricultural lifestyle, like I guess that's a bad thing. But in terms of purely a free market perspective, you're talking about, instead of 50% of your population doing farming, you're talking about 1% providing for, the 99% to go off and work completely other jobs or dedicate themselves to making those other jobs more efficient. It frees up
Right.
labor from toiling in the fields to some other endeavor. And so it's this
Yeah.
hyper efficient system. It also makes it a little more fragile. But
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. As much as I personally value efficiency, and I do, as a nationalist, I feel like that adds almost a scary level of fragility to something as basic as your food supply, where a disruption in some sector could disrupt that very small percent, 1% or whatever it is of farmers, and now you have food shortages where you really shouldn't have any, except that you had some bozo leader who closes down the ports with their poor policies,
yep.
or their skyrocketing gas prices that weren't supposed to happen, or X, Y, and Z, and then now you're really screwed.
Yes.
And so
100%.
again, it comes back to, again, I guess maybe this is Commander Culture's whole philosophy, where you had asked about price gouging too, where there's a certain level where the consideration of the culture or the society itself as a collection of human individuals outweighs the need for efficiency. And the overall point that I was getting at is, assuming that this process continues and continues and continues, people themselves could become obsolete. I mean, this is I think this is not just me talking. I think this is what the great leaders of the Great Reset really want. They want people to become obsolete in
Yeah.
their sort of formulation, because once you do that, then you remove complexity from a command economy. Would you not agree?
Yes, I would agree 100%. And a lot of people point at technology and say, "Oh, this is replacing humans." And an example, the most common example, is the Luddites. So there were these
Mm-hmm.
horses known as Luddite horses. They would be basically the horses moving the carriages, transporting people around. And then when Henry Ford came in and basically standardized the automobile, made it possible for the average man to own an automobile, these all of these workers who supported boarded the horses and worked with
Made
the
buggy
carriages
whips.
and everything. Yes, they went out of business, obviously. And you're like, oh, you're putting all these people out of work. And it's like, who would look at the automotive industry today and say that you put people out of work? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's thriving. And this happens all the time, where newer, more efficient processes or new products replace obsolete ones, and then those who are specialized in those obsolete products are essentially put out of a job. And it sucks for them, but it's better for the country as a whole. Now, the choke point for this has always been, the human being. You always need a human to pull the lever, or flip the knob. You always need a human still sitting at the computer, because all of our technology and efficiency has been focused on making the human being more productive. And that's
Mm-hmm.
because human beings have brains and they're capable of making decisions. For the first time in human history, we're facing this possibility of an artificial intelligence, a learning machine. And once you have that, the combination of a machine that can physically do a job better than human, and then also a machine that can mentally do the job better than a human, that is where you can delete the human entirely. So up until the previous couple decades, this concept of humans being replaced, it was a dumb idea. People only saw people getting put out of work because we were becoming more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Now it is changed again. This is totally unprecedented in human history. This has
Mm-hmm.
never been a factor before. But this AI thing has the possibility of combining the making the physical and the mental aspects of humanity obsolete. And then,
Well, this.
yeah,
Oh yeah, no. This is a great segue to the next. We're at the top of the hour. Actually, we've been going now for 59 minutes. And hopefully the viewers have felt that it is worth it. I want to move into the next sort of phase of our discussion here, and that is because we've talked about money, we've talked about what it is, we've talked about how labor and technology and efficiency all sort of combine. Now, since you talk about perhaps the human becoming obsolete, or humans, maybe not all humans, but many humans will become obsolete as AI takes over.
Yeah. And it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be better than, some 75 IQ, third world guy making your t-shirt or whatever.
Well, right. I made the comment to a compatriot the other day. I don't know why there are more than 2 or 3 workers at any McDonald's ever. I think that it's immense charity on the part of the McDonald's Corporation to continue to hire as many people as they do when they could easily automate the process of ordering, of food manufacture, of just about everything except cleaning and maintaining the machine. And so, that's eliminating a lot of stuff. At the same time that the leadership of the American government and many other governments in the West see fit to import large numbers of unskilled laborers.
That's why.
Which is a really big problem because you're having the twin pressures on the system. I want to move over. Oops, what do we got there? There we go. Let's talk about wealth preservation, right? That's one of the things I teased in the discussion there. Oh, good. And in this environment where it's going to be harder and harder to get a job, it's going to be harder and harder to keep a job. I think that wealth preservation is very important. I'm a big fan of intergenerational wealth. None of my ancestors were particularly wealthy in living memory, but what they did do is they stewarded their money very well and were generous with it in a wise manner to benefit those who came after them, my parents, myself, things like that. And so I think that we, as men of the West, I think that many of us are Christian or have grown up in that sort of environment, have a moral and ethical duty to be a good steward. One of the things that Christ talked about was being a good steward. In fact, as I was looking this up, I said, there's a parable where he talks about being a good steward, and he says, to those who grow their wealth, much will be rewarded, and those who waste their wealth, much will be taken away. And so I was looking up the parable of a faithful steward, and I come to this verse in Luke where it's talking about a faithful steward, and I'm like, wait. Did I go crazy? Did I miss something? That quote was not in there. So I went back and I looked, and there's actually 2 different parables where Jesus talks directly about the stewardship of money. And, Jesus wasn't teaching for very long, and the Gospels are pretty short. And so for him to be talking multiple times about stewarding your wealth, that which God has provided you, that's a pretty important thing. Sounds like something that we should do. And since Jesus, even if you're not a Christian, you would have to admit that he was a pretty wise and well-meaning individual. He says this, and so what do we think? This quote here. So in Matthew, he's talking about the good steward, and in Luke, he's talking about the faithful steward. One who is faithful with very little is also faithful in much. That's the quote there. So from a philosophical or religious point of view, this is an imperative. I also think that talking about my own experiences and extrapolating that out to the rest of the viewership, if you are a grandparent or if you are a parent, you have an absolute responsibility to your children and to your grandchildren, and that goes up as well. If you are somebody our age, a millennial or a Gen X or somebody like that, you have a responsibility to help your parents with your time, with your wealth, with your energy. And that's something that is that the cultural zeitgeist is against. It says, if you're a boomer, what's the great bumper sticker that boomers have? Here I am spending my kid's inheritance or something like that. This sort of like selfishness, uber alles. And even the spite that you hear against the boomers, which may or may not be completely justified, people know who the good-meaning and well-meaning individuals that help them out in their life are. And the Chinese, I have a note here. The Chinese called this filial piety, right? It's you have a responsibility to your parents. In fact, the Ten Commandments says this, doesn't it? And you have a responsibility to your children. You need to shepherd them through life, and you need to preserve your wealth for them. Much of the wealth that I have is tied up in areas where I don't intend it to ever be used. I intend to hand it in total, in sum, to my children. And I think probably you're thinking the same way. So this is something that I think we have
working and you don't plan on passing your wealth on. Like what are you even working for? Like,
right,
you're gonna die.
right,
Like, I don't understand that. Why you would waste a single
you
second working for yourself instead
you
of
can't take it with you.
Yeah,
exactly. You want your progeny to come off better than you started out, and this is a key feature, I think, of Western thinking, and I think that it's a feature of Western thinking that's deeply under attack by the enemies of Western civilization and of
whether
European culture.
explicitly or implicitly, implicitly just through, I guess, demonizing, focusing on family and making it difficult to have one, and then also explicitly just by slapping a massive inheritance tax, on your ability to try to make your kids better off than you were.
Right. It's particularly galling that there is something like that inheritance tax, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Where here it is, you've worked your whole life, you've stewarded your money just as God intended you to, and you die, and the IRS or whatever the equivalent is, the revenue services come along and say, "Hey, all of that great stuff, that's ours." And here's a scary thing, and I don't know, maybe our Australian or British friends can enlighten us, but I don't think that that's something that happens in a lot of other countries where there's a death tax. That sounds very Soviet to me, and it's not good. It's kind of ebbs and flows, doesn't it, in American politics, where it goes away, comes back, but it's highly insulting and prejudicial to honest work. And also to preserving.
It's weird to see how much, like, Americans in general pride themselves on freedom, free markets. Like, America is the epitome of, free market capitalism or whatever. And I really don't see it. I don't. There's so many different ways that is just beyond not true.
Well, and one of the scariest things that you can do to, the red, white, and blue patriot American person is just go to the very small book called The Communist Manifesto, open it up. Karl Marx helpfully lists out the 10 planks of the Communist Party and the Communist Manifesto, and see how many of those planks actually apply to modern day America. And I think it's up to 6 now. Whether it's a progressive tax, whether it's public education, whether it is a centralized monetary scheme.
We've always had that, right? That's as American as blueberry pie.
Oh, don't get me started. I'm going to come through the microphone and strangle you. Oh, yeah. But that's what people think. And that's what you and I are doing here in our tiny little corner of the culture war.
Yeah. We haven't always had those things, by the way. For majority of Americans' history, we did not have those things, and it made us great. Yes,
correct.
Just to clarify that.
For the shortest period of our time have we only had that. Most of our history we have not. And I think you even mentioned like 1860 America as being a high watermark in that. The final point that I want to make on why it's necessary to preserve your wealth. There's this thing called the Protestant work ethic that I'm sure that you've heard of. It says here, and it's ingrained in American culture. It's ingrained in a lot of European culture anyway. And what they call Protestant work ethic might look more sort of kinetic or energetic in Protestant cultures, but it exists in Catholic and Orthodox Christian cultures as well. And what this is work itself, the generation of wealth, I'll say, rather than necessarily work. The generation of wealth provides a purpose. It provides a purpose in life. Here's Scrooge McDuck, right? What is Scrooge McDuck's purpose in life? It's to accumulate wealth. If you take that away from Scrooge McDuck, well, he's sort of driftless, isn't he? I mean, he's going to go on some adventures. He's going to help out Huey, Dewey, and Louie. But what's his purpose? And so when we here in the real world go out to every day and wake up and work, we're providing ourselves a purpose. There are people, Bill Gates, for example. Look at the guy who I don't think you and I are particularly fans of him, but he goes out and he works. Does he have to? No. Does Elon Musk have to work? No. Any of these people, does
Yeah.
Donald Trump have to go work? They
You know,
don't, but they
yeah,
have a purpose. And the
yeah,
enemy of seeks to make us purposeless. That's their goal. If you are purposeless, it's the first step on the road to despair. And if and despair is how they get you. Despair is how they pull you down. All of these SJWs, all of these communist types, all they're walking little rustled balls of despair. It's because they have no practical purpose, and they try to give themselves purposes by getting in everyone's business, by agitating, by destroying cultural icons and monuments, and so don't let them do that.
yeah.
Give
I think
yourself the purpose.
yeah, it's no mistake that after Adam and Eve ate the apple, God promised Adam that he would eat bread by the sweat of his brow. And it's almost as if you take that away from a human. If you put them in a
Hmm.
cubicle and you take them out of nature, and or even worse, if you give them a universal basic income. You would go mad. Like, I asked someone one time I used to do landscaping a while back, which great learning experience. I learned a lot of Spanish doing that as well.
Is that a picture of
But
you landscaping right there?
yeah, that's me
Oh,
right there. Exactly.
okay.
Uh, but I was asking one of my buddies, first of all, you're on these job sites and you're working for super rich people, and you're always like, oh, it must be nice. And then you go to the bathroom and you're in like a porta john or whatever, and it's like 100 degrees out, and I'm sure you can. I'm not going to describe the conditions for you, but you can use your
Thank you.
imagination. Yeah. And I'm like, man, air conditioning sure would be nice. And then I asked one of my buddies, I was like, hey, how much would they have to pay you to do nothing? He's like, what are you talking about? I would love to do nothing. I'm like, no. How much would they actually have to pay you for you to sit in a chair, perfectly content, perfectly comfortable? They'll bring you a meal for 30 minutes. You can eat that. How much would they have to pay you? And he thought about it. He's like, you know what? They would have to pay me more than what they pay me now in order to do that. And I was like, yeah, it would be worse. I would go mad doing that, doing nothing. And so it's, yes, the work itself can give you meaning in your life. But I think with the Scrooge McDuck analogy, it's very easy to conflate working for money as the end versus working for
The
money
purpose.
as a means to an end. Yes, yeah, or
Hmm.
or the purpose. So for some of us, that might be benefiting our children. Why are you working? I'm not working so that I can have a nice car. I'm working so that my children, don't have to basically try to abstain from growing their family because they're worried about how they might financially cover those costs. Like,
Hmm.
I don't want my children to have to worry about that. So that is, as soon as you stop working for a purpose and start working for money as the purpose, you're gonna lose your mind, because that's not a fulfilling justification for your labors. And
Yeah, and
another analogy I would say
mhm.
would be, Sisyphus, and I'm sure you've probably heard the quote, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." This is a man who every single day wakes up. His labor is to roll a rock up the hill and then watch it roll back down at the end of the day, and he has nothing to show for his suffering. At the end of each day, and you know what he's going to do the next? He's going to get back up and he's going to roll the rock back up the hill, and it's really just suffering for suffering's sake. And it's an analogy for life is really what it is, and you need to be able to find a purpose and let it be fulfilling enough for it to justify that suffering that you would endure on a daily basis,
Hmm.
because that is something that you can be guaranteed without fail. 100% you will suffer in this life.
Hmm.
100%. So what do you have that makes it worth it to wake up in the morning and take on the day, essentially?
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a one of the fundamental tenets, one of the four noble truths of Buddhism is that all of life is suffering. And I've often read that and I've said, yeah, but and one of the other noble truths is that there can be an end to suffering. But just stating life is all of life is suffering, you're like, well, yeah, but make it fun. Do something that you enjoy, right? I mean, think of it, if Sisyphus was like I don't know, Johnny Knoxville or somebody, and he really liked watching that giant rock roll downhill, right? And just
He would
like
want to roll it up
blast into stuff.
as
He
high
would
as
want to
he
roll
can, yeah.
exactly every single day. He'd be like, "Oh, I'm going to get that damn thing right up to the top, and then I'm going to watch it go all the way down. And this time I'm going to try to aim it at that stalactite or whatever."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you can enjoy what you do, whether it's just being fabulously wealthy, whether it's working in the field and growing stuff, whether it's watching people grow stuff in the field, whatever it is that you particularly enjoy, let's go back there for a minute. Then do that thing, right? Bring value to your life. Here, let's elevate it a little bit, right? I mean, this is the Protestant work ethic. This is just the work ethic that we have. You give purpose to yourself, and then they cannot insert purposelessness to you. Now, that includes volunteering.
Western man.
I mean, Western man, right? Yeah. Right. And this is one reason why the United States and in general Western civilization has been has traditionally had more charity,
success,
right?
more prosperity.
I'll say
charity.
that, but just charity, right? Because if you're a like philanthropist, when you think of philanthropists, you don't think of like Mayan god emperors, do you? Instead, you think of billionaire railroad barons. They've got so much money. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to do something with their life. Hey, build a zoo, build a library, found an endowment, something like that. And so at the edge of time. Says, must one imagine Sisyphus happy? No, you don't have to, but it would be nice for Sisyphus if he enjoyed his Sisyphean task, right? It's sort of a goofy metaphor because, of course, he was meant to be punished, and so probably the gods chose something that he would hate. But it's in your general life. When you were a landscaper, you probably there were elements of your work that you enjoyed probably immensely. Early in my life, one of the things I did was I worked in the fields. I grew up in California. It was one of the things you did when you were a teenager. You'd go out and my particular thing was harvesting tomatoes. And some parts of the job I did not like. Other parts of the job I really enjoyed and got a lot out of, even though it paid beans. It built character, as they say in Calvin and Hobbes. So let's continue on here before I scare everyone with my 90s cartoon references. So the next point here is what can happen to your money, right? I would say if you're really interested in talking about what can happen to your money and where we're headed as a civilization, pick up this book. It's not the biggest book in the world, but it's a little more weighty than like the Communist Manifesto. So it talks about how governments mismanaging resources and economies always tend to lead towards restrictions in liberty that create the environments for tyranny. Right. So this is Friedrich Hayek. He's an Austrian economist.
We described that too in our description of the command economy and its like Leviathan tendency to just perpetually grow, a positive feedback loop, spiral up, however you want to describe it. But yes, it's almost as if the heads of each entity, the FBI or whatever, name your 3-letter agency, their success is defined by how much money they can milk from their superiors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't even have to be a 3-letter agency. It could be, the USDA, Department of Agriculture. It could be the local school board. It could be
expanding their group, their entity infinitely.
Yeah, or even a military, Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or one of these guys. This is what they do. So. There's 3 basic ways that you can lose your wealth destroyed. How is your wealth destroyed? Well, it's destroyed when it's no longer yours. The first way that the most obvious is theft, right? Some dude wearing a mask can walk into your house when you're either there or not and take your cool stuff, right? Sometimes that guy is a random, what do they call him? Independent operator. And sometimes it's the he could be a jogger. He could be jogging by. And But sometimes it could be the actual government, right? We've all heard the horror stories of in the United States, and I think I've heard of this in Australia as well. What was it? Civil asset forfeiture, right? Where the government comes in and says, "We presume you to be guilty of some random thing. Therefore, we're going to take everything that we like. We're just going to loot you, and then when we prove that, or when you prove that you're innocent, we'll give you back what hasn't been lost." Right. So the way this looks on the ground is, I think, for example, there was some guy who was living in Florida who withdrew a bunch of his money because he was going to drive to Las Vegas and help his mom pay off a big chunk of her home loan. Right. Well, not everybody has access to banks. For some reason, this guy decided to withdraw like 25 grand and was driving across the country. He got pulled over by the cops. The cops said, hey, do you have any machine guns, hand grenades, illegal lions, or huge amounts of money in your possession? Ha ha ha. And the guy's like, yeah, I have large, a big chunk of cash. I'm bringing it to my mom's. Oh, can you see it? Your headlight's out. I have a right to search your car, blah, 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 whatever. And they seized his money. Well, long story short, he went to go get it back, and somebody else had taken it. It had gone. The records weren't there. They lost all of his money. They said they didn't owe him any money. And this has happened hundreds and hundreds and thousands of times, right? The
They
thieves
get new cars too. They always confiscate the cars of suspected drug dealers, and then they just paint police on the side. And by the time everything's said and done, either the dude runs out of money and just stops trying to get his car back, or they put something on him that sticks, and they're like, "Yep, he was a drug dealer. An ounce of pot on him, and we get to keep his Escalade."
Right. Right. So everything that he had earned, and the thing that he was trying to engage in his filial piety, right? It goes away because somebody steals it, and that's pretty blatant, and that's obvious. And people can say, "My God, I'm enraged. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore." And people protest against the civil asset forfeiture laws and this and that. But it's not quite as insidious as this next fun event, right? Taxes. I think that all of us, except for the most dyed-in-the-wool libertarian, is going to say some taxes are certainly necessary. I mean, maybe you have to provide for a common defense. The U.S. Constitution calls for this. You have to pay debts that the country accrues over time. Some things need to be taxed. But one of the things, by the way, and I'm sure you know this, but maybe the viewers don't, we take for granted an income tax. We work, the government comes and takes a percentage of our income and runs away with it and pisses it away on whatever. That did not exist in the United States until 1913. There was no such thing as an income tax. The United States government funded itself through multiple wars, big wars. The Mexican-American War, the Civil War had a kind of income tax, but not really, and then it stopped. But we funded our entire expansion.
Amendment, I believe.
You got it. Across the entire span of the 19th century without one single proper income tax. We had regular tax. We had taxes, tariffs. So we would tax foreign people who wanted to sell stuff to Americans. Oh, China, you want to sell a bunch of crap to Walmart? Here, pay us 2%. Well, no. We're not going to do that now because of the 13th, because 1913. What we're going to do is tax the American people and hand extra money to places like China or Great Britain or Germany or Japan or whoever is not our friend at the time. And so taxes is a way of confiscation of wealth, but they tell you you're getting something for it. When this guy shows up, he's not, going to say you're going to get something for it, except maybe a whack upside the head with his flashlight. Here they say, oh, but you get roads that sometimes have potholes and we won't fix them when you want. Oh, but you get schools whose qualities are, spotty at best and universally crappy at worst. Oh, you get a defense. Oh, yes, you get defense, in which case, in Britain's case, they could barely beat Argentina in the 1980s. In the United States case,
we go and we fight other people's wars in their backyards and
just for kicks. Yeah.
Defense of whom, yeah.
And
it's good training, though. It's a sharpening the sword a little bit. You got to test everything out in the Thunderdome that is Afghanistan. And once everybody's got their Raytheon gets their paycheck, we can pull back. We got some cool gear to show for it, I guess.
Oh yeah. And you've got to enrich the the defense contractors. Heavens knows that they're not going to pay for their silver-plated Lamborghinis. just with their day job. So so the tax, it starts out as like, oh, this is a beneficial thing, but they're taking more than probably they should in most countries. One of the things a lot of people like to get on the Scandinavian countries. Oh, look at Sweden, they have a 60% tax. At the same time, they get 60% of the benefit as well. I would say most Swedes seem to be very happy with their system, whether they're right or left, because they're really getting actual legitimate value. I mean, their highways are so good that you can take fighter jets off from them. They're designed as backup runways, their interstate system, or what we'd call an interstate system, and that's how well maintained their stuff is. The roads are plowed, the garbage is picked up, the defense is kept to the necessary minimum. But in other countries, maybe we don't get that. Maybe the Australians pay a lot of money and get a truncheon up the side of the head.
But in the U.S., that was the idea behind the individual states, was be able to provide that local sort of application of government dollars, where the federal government was never supposed to be getting tax dollars from the people. It was supposed to be the states that the people live in directly benefiting those people. And then at the same time, a lot of the European countries that have these social systems benefit from not having to spend hardly any money at all on any defense system, because that's what
the Americans pay for it. Sure, yeah. And the added benefit to having states taxing you is that if you don't like how much your state is taxing you, you just move a couple of counties over to the next state.
Or vote them out, because your vote will theoretically count actually in a state election, whereas good luck trying to change anything at the federal level, just Joe Schmo in your house.
This is very true. The third method is the most insidious, right? And this is what we call inflation. And inflation is something, if you've been paying attention to the news, the financial news, all the talking heads are talking about it. All the heads of the central banks are saying, oh, inflation. First, last month, they were saying it's transitory, which means it's going away, which means prices are going to stabilize. And now they're saying, oh, inflation's actually a good thing because, here you go. Prices go up. That means maybe wages will go up, maybe sometime, except they're not, right? Well, here's the real humdinger, and I'm sure as an economist, as a trained member of the economic field, you would agree. Inflation is, as they say, always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. The reason that you have inflation is not because prices are going up. The reason prices are going up and the reason that inflation exists is because you have an expansion of the monetary supply and a weakening of that particular unit of currency in the first place. So as the US dollar, for example, becomes weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker as the time goes on, they print more and more and more and more money, right? It's kind of like if you take a pie and you say, well, I have this great big pie, I'm going to slice it into 620 trillion pieces. Well, it's not going to satisfy the end customer. And if they take $1, which used to be worth a heck of a lot in the world, and they slice it up into 100 trillion, or 3 trillion or whatever it is now, individual pieces, it's not going to be worth as much. Right. So inflation is the increase in the money supply, which they are doing hand over fist. Almost it can only be intentional. We know how this is going to end. You can tell the audience as an economist how many times a country has inflated itself to wealth and prosperity.
So never
is
the answer. Yes, and I think people probably wonder, if inflation is so bad, and we saw what happened in Weimar Germany, where the people with the wheelbarrows of cash going with their life savings to go buy a loaf of bread, and then the meme that is the Zimbabwean dollar today, $1 trillion bills being printed. People probably wonder, why would a government shoot themselves in the foot so hard? And the answer is threefold. The first one is when inflation is that high, people try to convert their dollars into hard assets sooner rather than later in order to preserve the value of their stored labor. And so it'll spur spending within your economy. And another reason is why debts end up being less. So when you have $1 trillion debt, or in the government's case, I think we probably past 30 trillion at this point. Everyone should Google U.S. debt calculator if you're curious about this thing. It's disgusting. Google the U.S. debt calculator, and you'll see a
I'll do
pretty
that right
heinous
now.
representation. Please do, because anyone who hasn't seen this, it hurts. And this is something that doesn't go away overnight. This will impact you. It'll impact your children. And it's painful to see. That's a lot of red, is what I'm seeing. And you could look at that personal debt per citizen. I recommend going on there, just clicking around, seeing what you find. But the point is that when you owe trillions and trillions of dollars, like the United States does, when you devalue your currency, now you like technically kind of own a little less. So you could just print more dollars and get rid of your debts that way. And then the last reason why inflation is good from, or at least there's an incentive for it from the government's perspective, is the impacts of that are delayed. So when you're the government, you print the money, you can buy a whole bunch of stuff with it before inflation actually hits, and then after you've bought every single house off the market and then inflation hits, you have all of your hard assets and everybody is holding, wheelbarrows full of cash that are worth nothing. And so there's a strong incentive there to actually create inflation, and the stated policy of the Federal Reserve is to maintain a set level of inflation. It's by design that inflation is part of the system. So it's really not in your interest, and it's able to be manipulated because it's a fiat currency instead of being a commodity backed one. Again, there's pros and cons of both, but this is just an effect of a fiat currency, is it being able to be manipulated in this inflationary way.
And a fiat currency, for the viewers, is just something, a currency, a form of money that is endlessly replicable depending on the will of the particular government. This is why the Zimbabwean government can print $1 billion gajillion dollars, and the Weimar Germany can do the same thing, and so can the United States. We've never seen a world power as powerful as the United States print its money so recklessly since the ending days of the Roman Empire. And we know how that all went, which is why Templar and I are on here talking to everybody, saying this here is coming, right? This right here, the U.S. federal debt to GDP ratio that I'm circling, that is a logarithmic increase. That is a hyperbolic jump. This amount will never be repaid. You who depend on Medicare for your health care needs will be getting shafted. You who require Social Security in order to pay your way through retirement are going to be SOL, right? This is all going to be taken from you unless you can preserve the wealth that you currently have. That's all there is. The Edge of Time says some of the infrastructure. Some say the infrastructure bill is a precursor to socialism and UBI. I would say it's definitely a precursor to tyranny. I would say the United States, and maybe Templar would agree with me, is already very well on the way to socialism. The United States is a corporate is a corporatist socialist entity at this point.
Yeah, and they mentioned UBI as well, and I'd like to clarify that any UBI that the government could guarantee to people, it would look something like, living in your pod and eating maggot paste, and getting it's the whole 2030 agenda thing, own nothing, be happy. It's a renter's market. All of this stuff. It's basically anything that the government, what giveth can be taketh away, and so I would not trust your life and well-being to an entity that could not care less about your life and well-being. So UBI would be on the way, but it's not the way that a socialist might paint it to you. It doesn't mean that instead of working, you have to go take walks in clean parks. It means you're living in your pod and you're dependent on a system that is completely indifferent to your well-being.
Didn't Klaus Schwab, of Great Reset fame, say something like everyone will own nothing and they'll like it.
And they'll be happy. Yeah,
and
you
they'll
can.
be happy.
This is like tinfoil hat. This is just us quoting people that have said these things, and these, Klaus Schwab, one of the, like a Rothschild kind of guy, basically a captain of globalism. And this is their plan for the future. This is what they would like to see happen. And again, this isn't like me reading between the lines. I'm just quoting their words, paraphrasing.
Oh, yeah.
I guess. So.
Yeah, you're not going to get any tinfoil hat stuff here from me or the Templar. It's all real talk. Edge of Time makes another good point. They can cut you a Social Security check for any amount, but they can't make it have any buying power. And this is 100% true. And it gets to actually my next point. You're one step ahead of us, my fellow, is that inflation, which we're looking at here in real time. I hope no one's getting dizzy. Let me know if you have epilepsy and I'll turn it off. It is the stealthiest of all taxes, and it's the most regressive of all taxes because it preys on the poorest and the most uninformed. The people with the least amount of wealth are the people who can least afford to have this chipping away at their wealth. The people who are the poorest are the people who can least afford Social Security to go bankrupt. Oh yeah, they'll cut you that check for $700, just like they cut you the check for $700 10 years ago. But $700 maybe now only buys you half a month's rent and half a month's worth of groceries. Well, now you're in big trouble. And this is this is by intention. They do this on purpose. Because now you're only more desperate for government. You're more radicalized. You're more hyper attenuated to the things that the government is going to do for you. And the more rabidly you'll attack anyone who tries to create a stable system that may induce some pain. Go ahead, Templar.
Yeah. And to your point, about the poor actually being the greatest victims of this, that's doubly true, not just because they're the ones who are most reliant on some of these, security net benefits, but it's also because the rich can afford to hold majority of their wealth in a commodity that's not depreciating in value. They can afford to ship all of their wealth off to Trinidad or a Caribbean island where, it'll be stored, it'll be insulated. They can buy up real estate in a bunch of houses like BlackRock is doing in order to protect all of their wealth, so that when the dollar goes from being worth, one of itself to being worth none of itself, they still have a house to show for it. A very, very famous example is the what was the flower? The Dutch flower. I can't believe I'm blanking on this.
Tulip mania.
Tulip. Yes.
Tulip.
Exactly.
Tulip mania.
You can buy a house with a single tulip, and then BlackRock buys all the houses with their little tulip farm, and then people realize that tulips are worth absolutely nothing, and they have nothing to show for their tulips, and BlackRock has a whole neighborhood full of houses. And for those who don't know, BlackRock is it's like a mutual fund. It's an investing firm. It's one of the most powerful in the country. Yes. Mm-hmm. And they own a large percentage of everything.
Mm-hmm. and they will own more too, because that's exactly what's going on. The process that Edge of Time talks about, the process here Michael McEntee talks about, inflation. When you inflate but you control the central bank, you can buy up everything before anybody else can get the trickle down effect. Inflation and depopulation, he says, solves their obligation problems. And I fear, and I think that my co-host here would agree, that that's exactly where we're heading. We're heading into an inflationary environment where no one owns anything, and we may very well be heading into this is speculation, but it's not tinfoil hat stuff, an environment where the powers that be aim to depopulate the large numbers of people because there's just too many of them. Earlier in the podcast or in the broadcast here, if you had heard, we were talking about the farmers and how inefficient this sort of farming was, and so you needed millions and millions of farmers, and now one guy can do all this with a tractor, so you don't need as many farmers. Well, what do you do with all those extra farmers? I don't know. You get rid of them somehow. And that's maybe what we're looking at. We have large numbers of people dying for various reasons, and they're just clocking out. And we have a smaller population for them to deal with. Sorry to keep talking over you there, Templar.
No, it's all good. For those of you who don't know, the actual lifespan of a male in the United States has gone down in the last couple of years, which
Yes.
a lot of people don't know. And it's like, how can as technology and healthcare increase, how is the lifespan of a human being going down? And it's whether it's by design or it's just a convenient truth. People are dying sooner. And we're not saying that this is a planned agenda necessarily. All we're saying is that there is a strong incentive for it.
We're also saying it's not, we're also saying it could be.
Whether or not, there exists an incentive for it, and the outcome that we're witnessing is that functionally a lower lifespan, more people dying sooner. And then not only that, but if you remember me mentioning earlier, for the first time in human history, we now have the combination of machinery making the physical labor of a human obsolete, and for the first time in human history, artificial intelligence making a human obsolete. So if you think about all the problems that come with human employees, and then all the incentives there are associated with not having human employees, or even a human population that will expect Social Security or Medicare and get mad if you don't provide those things. Again, not saying it's planned, not saying there's an agenda for it. I'm just saying there's a lot of reasons why the powers that be would want that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it makes it's incumbent on you, a man. I think most of our listeners are men of the West, who is specifically the target of. I mean, of at least somebody trying to take your wealth, at least somebody walking in and trying to inflate it away, steal it outright, tax it away from you, without giving you proper recompense in the form of services. This is what we face. This is what is in front of us. This is why Templar, this is why I am saying preserve your wealth in the ways that you can. We're going to talk about that here in our final segment. But, Edge of Time brings up a good point. Everything is in decline. The value of money is in decline. Productivity is in decline. The last time, I think the last Western type country that had a decline in the male life expectancy was Russia in 1991 after the collapse of the Soviet Union, where people were suiciding and drinking themselves to death. And we don't really necessarily have that. Although there is a giant opioid crisis, we just have people checking out.
I would say that's the same thing.
I think that it could be our answer to that, right? I think that some of it has to do with this, right? Your people are being laid off, people are being chased out of productive work, people are being told that they are not valued. They're being told by Brie Larson that movies are not made for them, and it is a real tragedy. IQ has been in decline. So real briefly on that, yes. It has across the Western world, not just in the United States. I think that there are several reasons for this. Not all, some people, they try to come up with simplistic reasons. The first that I heard was that it had to do with immigration. You import a people who have a lower IQ in general into your country, on average in their country, your average will go down. That's third grade math. That's definitely part of it. The thing is, that hasn't accounted for the complete collapse, at least in the UK and the United States. It's just been precipitously declining even beyond the lower IQ wage slaves that they've been importing over the last 30 or 40 years. It might have to do with electronics. It might have to do with that AI sort of taking over and people just losing purpose and getting dumber. It might have to do with, whatever, lead in the water. Who knows? But again, the Romans, who collapsed catastrophically for the world, had this exact same problem. They attributed it to lead in the pipes, actually. Although that wasn't the only cause, people were just getting dumber. If anyone in the audience has not seen the movie Idiocracy that Mike Judge made, you got to go out and watch it, because it's a documentary. It was meant as a dark comedy, and it's actually a documentary of where we're at here. Edge of Time again says men are not valued, so why should they work to death? That's exactly right. Men who are valued would work themselves to death, right? I know that both Templar and myself are blessed with spouses who we care very much about. We're blessed with children that we care very much about, and we would work ourselves to death for them, right? But if you don't have that, if feminism has taken away the good women that you can find, if a command economy has taken away the job that you value, if a communist school system has taken your children away from you, or a child protective services type situation has taken your children away from you, why do you have the incentive to even work, let alone to death?
Live.
Right?
Yeah.
You have you have nothing to live for. You're basically Sisyphus now. You're in an endless cycle of pain and torment, right? Templar and I we really feel for people like that. That's what we're here to try to help people out of. I want to continue on. I don't want to bury the lead here. Protection of your particular assets, right?
Yeah, insulating your wealth
There's
from these pernicious activities. Yes.
Yeah, and you can do it, and you can do it. You can't do it 100% because these entities are sort of bigger than you, but you're also lighter than them. It's like Jack and the Beanstalk, right? The giant is huge. He's slow. You are one man. You're very deft. You're very dexterous. You can move around a lot more quickly, whether that's moving jurisdictions. In the United States, a lot of people are going to Puerto Rico, or they're going to states that don't tax your income or don't tax your capital gains or things like that. British people, I think, have the option to go to certain Caribbean islands, or or you take, you say, well, look, there's stuff that they can't take away from me. They can't, and I'll point this out first. Let me see, where am I at in my slides? I was having fun looking at those numbers going up here. Here you go. That is what you have. They can't take that away from you. I realized this when I was going through college several years ago. And one of the things that they said is, you pay. Why are you laughing over there, Templar? I'm what are what's Monty Python say? I'm 37. I'm not old. And so when you go in and they say, oh, you have to pay $10,000 a semester or whatever to go to college or university, as they say in merry old England, but they can't take away the knowledge that you gain. So if you go and you become an electrical engineer and then default on your school loans, neener, guess what? I'm still an electrical engineer, and you are out all this money, which is why they made discharging student loans illegal in the United States. Great. Yeah, they got a leg up on us. But they still can't take this stuff away. They can't take away your knowledge. They can't take away the skills that you have, and they can't take away your attitude. And all of this, I'm not trying to be trite. This is really, 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 really serious. I know that some of the, like myself right now, I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you. One of my skills is, I've been told, the gift of the gab, right? And the viewers may agree or they may disagree. Certainly, Mr. Templar and I and the viewers have a certain amount of knowledge, and our attitude, our stick-to-it attitude, and our healthy demeanor brings us here today and gives us a competency to sit here and talk to you. One of our early commenters is a guy, where'd he go? Up here. He's way up here. He's the most helpful person I know, Mr. Brown, right? Mr. Brown has immense skills and knowledge in graphic design, and he has a great attitude that says, I want to help people. His greatest customer of all is the vaunted Lord Doomcock. His least vaunted customer is myself, right? He built my great logo. But he did that because he had the skills and the knowledge and the attitude, which gave him the competency, which gave him something that nobody could take away. They could tax as much as they want, but they couldn't stop him from making a background for Doomcock.
Or they couldn't make... How this is actionable, this whole thing, is maybe instead of working 10 hours a day at your wage slave job, you work 8 hours a day, and then you focus 2 of those hours on learning how to 3D print, learning how to shoot a gun, learning how to grow something in your backyard. And you don't even need to actually action it. Maybe it's just reading about these things so that if you had to, you could. And then when they take your entire life savings away, you're not, necessarily knocking on your neighbor's door. You actually have the tools that you need in your brain. There's a common phrase in the military as well, where knowledge weighs nothing in a pack. So you can bring that with you everywhere you go, and it'll just make you more deadly, either on the battlefield or if the battlefield comes to your doorstep in the form of inflationary hellhole,
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
you'll be much better off than without these things. And there's two times where you can learn how to adapt and overcome: before a crisis or after a crisis. Those are your only options. So it might be worth your time to invest less in a dollar that won't be worth anything tomorrow, and more in a useful skill, knowledge, and positive attitude that'll produce a positive outcome with you, no matter your lot or the hand that you're dealt.
Right, right. I know that you and I and other people are working on building up some of our agricultural skills. We're looking at getting other methods of employment. What they call side gigs or something like that, where you mentioned 3D printing, all of this stuff, right? To sort of call back to my nerd days. Dungeons and Dragons, right? You have a character sheet. I love what you said. Is that a Marine Corps saying where it says knowledge doesn't weigh anything in the pack?
It's a general military saying. It
I love
applies
it.
universally in or out of
Oh,
the
it does.
military.
Because what you've got with your character sheet, you've got your intelligence, you've got your wisdom, you've got your charisma, and that stays with you no matter what. It doesn't matter if you lose your pack in a dungeon crawl. It doesn't matter if something falls into your bag of holding and disappears. You still have your charisma. You can still make dexterity checks. You can still do all this great stuff. You still have your strength. Go to the gym. Learn how to grow a garden, even if that's starting out with a single flower. I mean, so Edge of Time, again, he makes a comment. It's a good comment, but I don't want you to despair, Mr. Edge of Time. You say, I don't see how they can stop Big Corp from passing their 15% global tax on the consumer, which you can't. I agree. So Mr. Commander Culture's remedy for this is simply increase your revenue stream by 15%. So if they're going to tax you, do up it by 15% on your own side. They're going to take from you. You're just going to add more to the wealth pool. On the other side, like Templar was saying, take away things that they could tax you on. So are they going to tax you on that head of lettuce? Absolutely. So you know what? Never buy another head of lettuce. Grow it in your garden. Mm-hmm. Right. Are they going to tax you on eggs? Hell yeah, they're going to tax you on eggs. So you know what? Get Bessie the chicken and keep her out in the backyard, or keep her at your uncle's house who lives out in the Scottish moors or whatever, and go up and visit them and bring back the eggs. Like take yourself out of the system. I'll go way back up here in the comments because Edge of Time was making some good real talk here. He was. He said the goal should be non-doing, right? Nothing we do is important. That's liberation. I think that's a little nihilistic for me personally, but the sentiment is right there, right? If you take yourself out of their system, they can't tax you for it, right? Now they can come after you and they can where is it? They can kick in your door, right? They can tax you higher for the Randy Weaver treatment. They can tax you higher for the stuff that you actually do have, right? But at a certain point, it's diminishing returns. So, take yourself, and this is a phrase I like. It's from Ayn Rand, speaking of libertarians, but she says going Galt, right? It's where you just remove yourself from a destructive system. It's and people do this all the time. If you're in an unhealthy relationship, you break up and you move across the country. Right. If your parents were abusive, you grow up and you join the Marine Corps or whatever. You remove yourself from an abusive, damaging situation, and then you're more healthy. That's why, I mean, even animals seek to escape. If you keep a rat in a crummy cage, he's going to try to get out. If you keep a dog locked up in a kennel, he's going to try to get out. If you treat the animal well, they're going to be fine. If you treat a human well, they're going to stick around. If you treat them poorly and try to pass this big 15% global tax, well, guess what? You, I, all these people, we're going to pull out of the system. And like you were saying early on in our stream, very early on, catch it on the repeat, like, share, and subscribe. Like Templar was saying, if he's got chickens and he's really good at chicken farming, and he's got the eggs and he's got a couple of chicken breasts every once in a while and some fried chicken, well, that's great, because here I am growing a bunch of tomatoes because I was a tomato farmer, worked with a tomato farmer when I was in high school, and now I know how to do that, and we'll trade. So he doesn't have to get really good at everything. He just has to get good at some stuff. What if you're not very good at fixing your car or your tractor? Well, somebody is, and you can give them the value. It's networks as well. right? That was how Templar and I found each other in this giant ether, is that I was looking for somebody who I said, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know. And I'll bet that there's people that I can learn from. And lo and behold, up pops Templar. And I think Templar was thinking the same thing. Hey, where's somebody that I can learn from? Where's somebody who's seeing things from a different perspective? And here's Commander Culture. And this is what we're all doing. Here's Edge of Time. Here's Michael McEntee. Here's all the people that follow us. Here's Mr. Brown, right? All of these guys. We're part of a growing network. Even if we can't see each other all the time, we can certainly help each other in the future, and that's what we're doing. So let's see. I don't want to continue to take time. We're approaching the 2-hour mark, and I don't really want to go beyond that. But if you have the means, right? Somebody up in the thread was saying Bill Gates is buying lots of farmland, and he is. Yep. But guess what?
Farmland,
so can all of us. Right?
Yeah.
If I don't know how it is in other countries, I know that England has a lot of people and not a lot of land anymore. But Australia's got a lot of, America's got a lot of land. This picture here is from Hawaii, right? I said it the proper way with the apostrophe, Hawaii, and you have to say it, otherwise Hawaiians will get really mad at you.
True.
And so this is Hawaii, right? That's a place that doesn't have a lot of land. It's a volcanic island that's chock full of tourists and Mormons. And so you've got a bunch of stuff growing here. This is a map that has prime farmland, not just the crummy stuff, but this is prime farmland that is being used in the United States. This was 1997, which is a ways back, not too long ago. That's when I graduated from high school. But there's a lot of farmland here. And the greener it is, the better it is, the more prime farmland it is. You're telling me you can't find a corner up here? Go on to Zillow. You can buy land for practically free up here in Maine. You can buy land for practically free out here in West Virginia, in Indiana. They're right in the middle of that green, right there on the Wabash River. I think Doomcock even sings a song about that. Texas, a wide open country, right? Now, California, you probably don't want to be here because, all the crazies on the coast take all of this stuff. Don't ask me how I know, but you farm tomatoes somewhere around there. But look at this. When somebody says North Dakota, everybody sort of snickers. Wow, North Dakota, I don't want to live out there. It's all prime farmland. This right here, this is the Badlands. The Badlands. You can grow a lot of stuff in the Badlands and have oil, squirting out of the ground. In some places, you can take $5,000, $10,000, and buy land in Texas. You absolutely can. In government auctions and other things, you can buy land in North Dakota. Maybe this isn't the greatest place in the world to be if you like to live in Key West, but I'm telling you, there are places you can go. You can be like a miniature Bill Gates and buy up prime farmland. Like, come on, people. Some of the other stuff that the Templar and I were talking about. Maybe you're not comfortable holding gold. Maybe you don't feel comfortable or know how to go out and buy something like Bitcoin. These are important stores of wealth in our inflationary world. To reiterate, you do not want to hold on to fiat currency. Get rid of the British pound, except as you need it to go down to the supermarket. Get rid of the US dollar, get rid of the Australian dollar, laugh at the Canadian dollar, and then get rid of it. But those
are different, by the way. The US dollar and the Canadian dollar are two different things. They both have the same symbol, but everyone looks on the back of books and they go like, "Oh, why is everything more expensive in Canada?" It's literally a different currency.
It is, believe it or not. Canada's actually a different country, at least they claim. But
don't go that far.
So this is what you can do, folks. Please, I've taken small steps. Templar has taken small steps. People that we know have taken small steps. People that we listen to on YouTube, people that we've seen. You can do this too. Michael McEntee says, "Thank you for here we go, for bringing the morale." That's what I do. Okay, I am the remoralizer. Herbert West was the reanimator. Commander Culture, remoralizer. That's what we do, because without morale. No, never a black pill. Without morale, you lose. Okay, every battle you must bring morale to the front of the battlefield, and the tactician in Mr. Templar will agree. But what we're looking at here is prime farmland. Okay, even if you buy it and you just sit on it, or you call up a farmer and you say, "Hey, I just bought 5 acres of soil soybeans and I don't farm soybeans. Can you farm it for me and then pay me some rent? He'll be like, sure. And then guess what you have? You have productive farmland that was just sitting there on Zillow for 36 weeks, 36 months, not doing anything because nobody wanted to up the payola. You can go out to the store, to the coin store, or to the place, and you can buy a bar of silver. If you're really lucky, you can buy a bar of gold. You can go down to some place like Coinbase. Not that I'm recommending it because they don't pay me to advertise for them, but it's a very easy place to go and buy some Bitcoin or buy some Ethereum, which is going to do you better than a dollar bill sitting in the bank. Now, obviously, if you have dollar bills,
it's like holding gold in Weimar Germany. You don't have to bring a wheelbarrow to get your bread.
Here we go.
Yep.
Look at this chart. This is the last thing I want to leave most of you guys with, and I really appreciate all of your viewership. I love it. Like the video, share the video, subscribe the video. What? Pardon?
The comment on the bottom. I'm having trouble seeing the bottom axis.
Oh, my bad. Sorry, Michael. I'm gonna have to take your comment off here, even though you're up in my game. Okay. There we go. Yeah, I apologize. This is recent. So again, 1997. We were talking about prime farmland, right? The yellow is the long-term government bond rate. Basically, a long-term government bond rate, and you can back me up on this, Templar, the economist, is the strength of that central government's word, right? If you have a high bond rate, people believe, by God, that this government is going to be around for the long haul, and they are honest to a fault, and they will pay this stuff back. The lower that your bond rate is, the more people think, I don't know what these guys are all about, but they're not paying me too well, so I'm going to give them too much money, to get the bond rate. And what we see from the time that I was in high school to recent history is a collapse in the government bond rate. This is in the United States.
Collapse in the confidence of the United States' ability to pay its debts is what it is.
Right. Of the world, not Americans. Americans are still, eating apple pie and watching NASCAR. But not that there's anything wrong with either one of those two things. But they're not paying attention to this. And this right here is the inflation rate. And this, by the way, is the published inflation rate, which the economist Templar will tell you is not the actual inflation rate.
Yeah, no.
And it spikes up like this, way high. This is during the housing crisis, and then it goes way low as they try to get it under control. And then what you see here, what the important part is the distance between these two things. And at some point, like here, where we are right now today, where we wake up every morning, the confidence in the U.S. dollar has surpassed where the American government, if you want to call it that, the central banks of the United States are printing money beyond the confidence that is invested in that particular government. We're in a very dangerous time. We are looking at an economic collapse. That is not a black pill. That is a call to action. That is a call to arm yourself with prime farmland, even if you don't use it. That is a call to arm yourself with not this, but this. It's a call to maybe stock up on a little bit of this, educate yourself on it, just like you'd educate yourself on this or even this, and then do something about it. This is a call to, where are we here? This is a call to do this, improve your knowledge, improve your skills, improve your attitude, right? And I'm not, we all struggle with this. It's easy to get despair in this sort of environment. I know a lot of people, even people on this that are listening to this video, have said at times, "Oh my God, this is more than I can handle." But guess what? It's not, because we are these guys, and we're working with this guy, and the people on the other side are just scumbags. All right. I yes, I'm out of breath. I don't have. I have a lot more to say, but I don't want to take much more time from the viewer. Did you want to have a parting word there, Templar?
Yeah, I would just say I think the educating yourself is usually the first step for any of these things, whether it's buying farmland, buying cryptos, buying any of these other things, or just learning useful skills. It all starts with the knowledge base. So if you can't action anything in reality, at least action the things that you can control. What's going on in your head. So no matter what course of action you do decide to pursue, it usually starts with the attitude and the knowledge base to take that action. So there's your starting point. There's your first step. Buy the book, do the Google search, start arming yourself.
Talk to the experts.
Yeah,
I mean,
you don't have to. Look, someone has already done this. You don't need to reinvent the wheel.
no, and people want to talk about it too. Like, you talk to a gardener, you talk to somebody that's maybe good at ammunition reloading, or somebody that's 3D printing, or a Bitcoin enthusiast. They will tell you everything, including what they had for breakfast. And all you have to do is ask, and then all of a sudden you're armed with the knowledge that it took them years or decades to gain. Yeah. I'm gonna close it off there. Thank you very much for listening. Both Templar and myself appreciate it. If you would be so kind as to like the video, share the video on whatever social media you have, and go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. We want to try to start getting this out as much as possible, and we will be on at this same time weekly. That's a commitment that Templar and I are making to the viewers. We want to start bringing good quality conversation, and we like the feedback that you guys bring to us as well. So again, like, share, subscribe. This has been Commander Culture. This has been the Templar, and we are signing off for this evening. Please protect your wealth. Do not let them destroy it. Tomorrow belongs to you, to the stars.